Welcome to Governing Ourselves, a Libertarian Atheist podcast. I'm Adam.
And I'm Lisa, and we're here to talk about religion, politics, life, the universe, and everything in between.
Hey Lisa.
Hey Adam.
What are we talking about today?
Today's episode is about our journey from Republican and Democrat Party to the Libertarian Party.
So my parents were conservatives, and yours?
Yeah, both my parents were Republican.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, conservatism and religious upbringing tend to go hand in hand. I think that's safe to say.
Yeah, I think so too.
So definitely they were Republicans. Although, when you talk to my mother, I think that a lot of her leanings were actually, Democratic or left.
Oh.
But because of the connection to religion, I don't think she would ever put, Democrat on her registration.
Has she always had those views, or is it just more recently?
I think she's always had more liberal views.
Huh.
But neither one of them, I would say, really studied the philosophy of, political philosophy at all, really.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that they didn't know what they were talking about, but, I don't think that, I think like many conservatives, they considered the world they would like to live in based upon, their own personal rules of conduct, right? There are things that I want to live my life this way, and according to these principles, therefore everyone else must as well. And I think that that's kind of my issue with republicanism, because of the religious influence. It tends to want to propagate itself through force.
Do you think the Democrat Party's the same way?
In a different, more perhaps passive-aggressive way. Because there's definitely a dogma, right? And there's definitely a set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
There are things you can say and things you can't say.
Yeah, I agree.
So I grew up conservative, and you grew up conservative as well, both Mormon households.
Yep.
Okay, so parents are conservative. I can remember being on a car ride, and I don't remember how we got onto it, but they started, talking about politics, and I think I asked something to the degree of, why are we Republicans and not Democrats? And they basically went through the different points. Mm-hmm. Not all of them comprehensively, of course, because I was a kid. And
yeah.
I think I still had my Game Boy in my hand, so I was looking for a brief answer. It's like, okay, like in 3 words or less, I want to play some Pokemon. But one of the big things they brought up was abortion. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, well, basically Democrats want to kill babies, and,
Gosh.
Of course they straw man the hell out of it.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, wow, that sounds really evil, right? I guess I'm a Republican too. Mm. And so I would just sort of defend Republican ideas as I grew up. I had some degree of challenge to those ideas in high school, but not much. Mm-hmm. Because, high schoolers don't have much knowledge by and large.
No.
And so it's basically a contest of, regurgitating what your parents say.
Yep.
So I was able to stay conservative for a while, and then I went on a mission. And then we'll pause there and go to your life.
Okay. My parents were Republican, still are.
Yeah.
And I didn't think much about politics growing up. So I had my senior year of high school, one of the classes that was required, one of the very few, was one half of the year, one semester was economics, the other half was government. And
Right.
So that was my real, I guess, first intro into just, actual political discussions. I still, into college, I still considered myself a Republican, and when I registered to vote, I didn't know much about any of the parties. And so really, I registered as a Republican because my parents were Republican. Like,
Yes.
that's why I registered that way. And then in college, was, um, I went to a fairly liberal college. And when talking about politics and economics, uh, I remember that Karl Marx was brought up. So was John Locke and a few others. And I remember that communism or socialism, Marxism, that they weren't talked about in a negative light. So I never ever remember the discussions going in the direction of, look at what socialism did in Russia. Look what
Hmm.
socialism did in China. You know, this is what comes of socialism. No, never any discussions like that. I was taught politics as if Marxism was sort of a valid way of doing things.
Yeah.
And
Like, here's just an alternative view.
yes. And so, my campus was very left leaning. And
Mm.
I remember walking through the quad one day, and there are a bunch of booths up. I forget what the occasion was, but one of them was the Libertarian Party.
Mm.
And I didn't stop by, I just kept walking. But that one stuck out to me because I was like, oh, I've never heard of that before. I wonder what they're about. But
Mm.
I was on my way to go do something, so I didn't, bother to think about it. But that was the first time I remember seeing the Libertarian Party. I was used to Republican, Democrat, and the Green Party. That was another big one where I lived. So, um, yeah, I'll
That
pause there.
we
Mm-hmm.
both grew up in California, right?
Yes.
But
Yep.
I was in more Southern California, where conservative values can at least breathe a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I was in the Bay Area.
So yeah.
Extremely, extremely liberal. About as liberal as you can get, really.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Berkeley's right there.
Berkeley, San Francisco. Yeah.
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 Or as our mutual friend Tim used to call it, Berserkly.
Berserkly.
Yeah, that's what he
They've
used
got
to call
some interesting ideas out there.
it.
Yeah. So
So
when did you start to become more Democrat leaning?
yeah, so I went on my mission, and I went to the south of France,
Hmm.
and that's where I first sort of ran into gay people. You
Oh.
know? And growing up in a conservative religious household, basically I was made aware that gay people existed,
Yeah.
and what they did was very bad,
Hmm.
and that whole thing. And it was, let's see, I graduated high school in 2002.
Hmm.
So at the time, I would say very few people in my school were coming out
As gay?
as gay,
Oh.
right? So I'm sure that a huge percentage of the people I went to school with were gay, but you really just couldn't be open about it yet.
Hmm.
Um, at least not in Southern California. And so it was the first time I started seeing that in France, and I still managed to hold on to a lot of my beliefs. But one thing that was strange in France was that uh, even a lot of the Mormons there were very left, right? And
Hmm.
they thought that President Bush was basically the Antichrist, and they were very into politics, more into politics than I had ever observed
Yes.
Americans being, and they were more interested in American politics, and, and I was really struck by that, and so
I think
I would
Europe in
ask,
general, Europe in general tends to be much more
oh
into
yeah,
politics. Americans, by and large, are ignorant of politics or just apathetic.
well, I think they Americans like to treat politics like they treat their sports teams, right?
Oh,
Like
which
football
one's
culture
winning?
is everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why do you like the Raiders? Because Raiders, you know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
because
there's
in the Bay Area it's either Raiders or San Francisco 49ers, and yeah.
right. No, regardless of the fact that like none of the players are from any of the places that they're
Hmm.
playing for, right? Like there's nothing particular about it. Um, but yeah, it's it was strange seeing liberal Mormons, and
Mm.
I'd ask him why. A lot of the beliefs don't jive,
Yeah.
and basically he said, I remember this one guy, and I think that he's probably the biggest. He was the biggest influence on me. His name was Michel, and he basically said, "Well, the plan of the devil was to force everyone to be good,
Yeah.
right? So that they couldn't possibly sin, and so that way everyone would be saved.
Mm-hmm.
But Christ's plan was to be, was to sacrifice himself so that everyone could be redeemed from their sins, so they would have, choice while in life,
Yeah.
right? At least according to Mormon mythology.
Yes.
Um, and that really struck me, and I was like, wow, maybe as Republicans, we are just trying to force everyone to be good.
Hmm.
We're trying to make everyone live according to our precepts. And then after my mission, I went to art school in San Francisco. And I even took a sex and gender class.
Oh.
And so definitely my views were open. I was ready to think other things.
Okay.
And I think that that's the main thing. Like, whenever you change your political leanings, you have to be in the mindset that you can change,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when those walls come down, you can reform.
Yes.
And I was watching Colbert and Jon Stewart and all this stuff, and I was fairly new at politics, and it just made sense. It seemed like the right was the war party. They were against gays. They were against personal freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking like, Bush era going into what would have been John McCain had he won. Um, and yeah, so it was very clear that Republicans were wrong.
Hmm.
And if Republicans are wrong, the Democrats must be right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where my head was for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't be until later where I started to become disenchanted with the Democratic Party and with the left.
Hmm.
So that's pretty much me up through college. Long story short, gaining a greater tolerance for gay people, um, getting outside of America and seeing, basically gaining anti-war views. I think
Mm.
that's the long and short of it.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, when I was first married, that was the first year where I heard about the Constitution Party.
Mm.
I'd never heard of it before. I didn't know it was a thing, and I don't even remember where I heard about it. But I thought, oh my gosh, here's a party that's all about the Constitution. It's all
Yeah.
about getting back to it. Limiting the federal government, all these just different things that I liked. And I was also still a Christian. I was still a believer in God and Christ and all that. And the Constitution Party was that as well. It's a Christian party. And at the time, my views, kind of jived with it. The one point that didn't for me was their stance on gay marriage. The
Mm-hmm.
Constitution Party is not for gay marriage. And
Right.
that's one of the points of the party that I struggled with because growing up in the Bay Area, you got a lot of gay people out there. And
Yes.
they're good people, a lot of them. Being gay doesn't make them bad or sinners or, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one reason why I was like, the Constitution Party sounds really good except for this. And I still stuck with the views of the Constitution Party for a while. And then I think my shift away from it happened around the same time as my shift away from Christianity. Around the
Mm.
same time that I left the church and that I was trying to figure out my views about God in general.
Do you think that there's a connection there, like, and like, if you're just not going to be religious anymore, like, how possible is it to stay Republican? I'm sure there's atheist Republicans out there, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to jive naturally.
Yeah, it would have to depend on what exactly the issue is and if the Republican Party is appealing to God or if they're appealing
Mm.
to the Bible for this, the foundation of this argument.
Yes.
Yeah.
There does seem to be difficulty there. I know there's even a wing that is like gay Republicans.
Mm.
I think they're called the Log Cabin Republicans. I don't even know if that's real. Um,
Hmm.
but basically, the idea is that um, President Lincoln might have been secretly homosexual,
Really?
and yeah,
Why?
so there's a whole story there.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I'd
um,
have to look at their evidence for that.
okay, so I'll just say I first heard about that from American Dad, so I should probably see if that's real or not.
Okay.
Um, okay, so I think last time when we were talking about religion, I talked about Proposition 8
Yes.
and how that, really kind of hurt my sensibilities. And so, I think that helped me politically to turn to the left.
Mm.
So eventually, ended up moving to Arizona. And, I basically had a job where I didn't have to interact very much with, coworkers or anything. I got a lot of downtime.
Mm.
And it was 2008. No. It was 2012. It was 2012, and so the election was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I started just reading. I was just reading news all the time. And this is, I started out as a big Barack Obama fan. I voted for him in 2008.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't believe that he beat John McCain. I didn't think that was possible. And I was astounded because I'd bought into the whole white America thing. And so when Obama won, and not only won, but destroyed John McCain, just
Huh.
won by a lot. I was blown away, and I was a huge fan. I liked his swagger and the cut of his jib.
Yeah.
I still think Obama is a cool guy.
Yeah.
I still think he's an impressive guy.
Yeah. He comes off as very charismatic.
And I could see that if you share the sensibilities, you could really look up to that guy. Who would I rather hang out with, Trump or Obama? I would probably still prefer to hang out with Obama. Like
Most people
like,
probably
who's the guy
would.
probably would, like who's the guy that you do want to have a beer with, or if we don't talk about politics, who do I want to talk
Yeah.
to?
If it's politics aside, whose company would you enjoy?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I'd rather talk to him, so.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I just started reading, but I did become disenfranchised with Obama because one of his big campaign promises was to end the wars.
Yeah.
And I was developing very anti-war sensibilities while going to art school in San Francisco. Go figure. My anatomy teacher was telling me how evil Bush was, and well, why is he so evil? Well, it's because he's just, killing people across the ocean and it's not solving any problems.
Mm.
And, maybe he did 9/11, right? That conspiracy was kind of still floating around.
Mm.
So, I eventually came to the idea that, yeah, war is basically bad unless you're fighting for your immediate preservation.
Yeah.
And so I started reading for what else was out there. And I looked at the lineup of Republican candidates for the primary. And this is where my story is going to converge with most libertarians, I would say. I discovered Ron Paul.
Ah.
And Ron Paul, I still consider one of my political heroes. And I have a lot of affection for him. There are places where we might diverge a little bit, and we may disagree. I mean, he's a very religious guy. But, this was a Republican that was unlike any other Republican.
What did you like about him?
Well, I love the anti-war stuff. He was more anti-war than even 2008 Obama was.
Mm.
And he was all about personal freedom. And I had never fully bought into the economic principles of the left. And so I liked, how he explained, free market capitalism. I liked the concept of the gold standard that, you couldn't just print endless money for endless spending, that there was at least a long-term consequence to all of this.
Yeah.
And the left just seemed completely unfazed by the idea of endless spending. And so I had always, had a problem with that. And so anyway, there were a lot of little things. He talks about raw milk. I still don't care about raw milk. Sorry, guys. But I would listen to his speeches, and I would just get really inspired. And, but I did my diligence, and I looked at all the other candidates, and, eventually I thought, well, at the very least, my favorite Republican is Ron Paul, and, so then the question became, do I like him better than Obama? And the answer was an emphatic yes.
Okay.
And so I ended up finding a group of libertarians, because learning about Ron Paul would lead me to libertarianism. And I realized there was another option, right? There was option C. Now, I guess I had heard about libertarians prior to that, because Jon Stewart would love to make fun of Glenn Beck.
Yeah.
And Glenn Beck would, at least at the time, I'm not sure what he's doing these days, but at least at the time, he would consider himself a libertarian. And so, and I would sometimes see the left poke fun at libertarians for basically being Republicans that smoke weed, right? Or they would show off the more anarchist side, so they would, be in like a Mad Max scenario or something like that.
Nice.
And so I thought, libertarianism was probably just a joke too. That after learning about Ron Paul, I realized this is really probably what I've been believing my whole life. This is probably who I really was. I was for, absolute personal freedom wherever possible. And that whatever your religious beliefs were, you didn't have the right to enforce those beliefs on someone else. And then that would lead me to learning about the non-aggression principle and, going on from there and just being like, this is clearly the right choice. And, my leftist friends would argue it's clearly not the right choice because of, economics or whatever. But I also started dropping my utilitarian views, for a more, moral, absolutist, sort of Immanuel Kant type view. And I would say, well, listen, even if you could prove that government intervention into the economy worked, which I don't believe did work, but even if you could prove it, it wouldn't change the fact that taxation is theft, because you're using force in order to, to collect your tax money.
Yeah.
It's not voluntary. Now, I know last time we talked about, this is not an ANCAP podcast, but at that time, I think I was ready for, an anarcho-capitalist view. But later on, I would temper that a bit. But at the time, I think I went full blown,
no government.
fun libertarian. It's like, it was, yeah, pretty much little to no government, right?
Yeah.
Because government is force. Government is inherently violence. And if you're pro-violence, then you're probably wrong.
Mm.
So, I think that's where I'll pause for now.
Hmm. Well, when I considered myself more favoring the Constitution Party. And I think what really changed my mind was I'm trying to remember. It was a very slow process.
Well, you
But
mentioned the views on gay marriage.
yes, yes. And just a few days ago, I found an article online, Libertarian Party versus Constitution Party.
Hmm.
Basically, what's the difference between the two? And there are actually a lot of differences. They
Ah.
both like the Constitution, but like I said, the Constitution Party is very much about God, about the nation was founded by Christians. It's a Christian nation.
Hmm.
We base things on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Whereas Libertarian Party is we respect other people's religions, but we don't advocate any specific religion. We respect individual rights, and that's that's our main thing. And one of the biggest differences between the two parties is gay rights.
Yeah.
So, I recommend reading that article. It's lp.org, and we can link the article
Yeah.
somewhere. But yeah, it's called Libertarian Party versus Constitution Party, and it was written by Andrew Davis in 2008. And so I compared the value sets of different political parties. It was very methodical, very much like, okay, what does this one believe on this issue? What does this other party believe on the same issue? And I just compared those across the board. And as I left the Mormon religion, the LDS church, one of the things that I really wanted to break free from was the feeling of control. Not personal control, but the feeling of being controlled.
Yes. Of
And
course.
it's a huge thing. It's a huge sticking point for me
Yeah.
is, people telling me what to do. People trying to control my actions, control what I do, control what I think. And so for me, the Libertarian Party started to sound more and more appealing. Just the idea of, hey, you can think what you want. You can do what
Yes.
you want. You're free to do what you want, as long as you're not impeding upon the rights of other people. And so just the idea of freedom, the idea to just be who you want to be, that to me was what the Libertarian Party represented. And so that's why it appeals to me so much. I don't know a whole lot about economics. I could learn more about it. I probably should, really. But for me, it was the aspect of personal freedom and the idea of government staying out of our lives, out of our personal lives. The whole Big Brother thing, where people can listen in on your cell phone calls. The government listens in on people's cell phone calls. They read their emails. They, look up the details of their social media profiles. The government does all of that, and I think it's absolutely wrong. And
Yeah. I
so,
think the erosion of the Fourth Amendment played a big part of my transformation as well.
mm, yeah,
Because when Bush was president, the left was very concerned about the Fourth Amendment.
hmm,
With the Patriot Act, and they
yes,
successfully told me that the Patriot Act was bad, and I was like, yes, I believe you. I'm convinced.
hmm.
It's just that when Obama did it, they were all like, this is fine.
No, it's not.
And it's not fine,
No,
right? And,
it's
and
not fine at all.
that's what really turned me off was that surveillance was expanded. Our efforts in the Middle East were expanded.
Hmm.
Our droning of people, Obama killed way more, people in the Middle East than Bush did.
Yeah.
It's actually almost impressive. If it horrible and tragic,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the way that they talk about the surveillance is that, we're doing this to stop foreign terrorists. We are not spying on our own people. And that's a lie.
well, when you look
That's a
at the
flat
history of
out
the
lie.
yeah, it is a lie and it's an excuse. And when you look at the history of the NSA, this isn't the first time.
Mm-mm.
The NSA has existed under other names. It's you know it was basically always created as some agency or another in order to combat foreign spying and intelligence.
Yeah.
And then once peace is achieved, it remains, becomes corrupt, is used for political gain, and then is abolished or hurt in some way, and then it comes back for the next conflict. Um,
Yeah. So that's pretty much my journey to the Libertarian Party. It was realizing that the Constitution Party didn't quite match what I personally believed, especially with regard to gay marriage. I thought gay marriage should be fine. It doesn't hurt anybody. They should be free to have the same benefits that heterosexual married couples have. There's no good reason why they shouldn't. And the other thing was probably leaving the church and realizing that I didn't want to be controlled. And the whole government surveillance thing. It was also around that time where I think what probably did it for me, in fact, I think I remember, what finally tipped me towards the Libertarian Party, or just the idea of, government get the hell out of our lives, was learning about, oh, what's his name? The guy who worked for the CIA and then he stole a bunch of
Snowden?
documents. Yes, thank you, Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I, I learned about him and I saw the documentary of him. It's called Citizen 4. And then I watched the movie that Joseph Gordon-Levitt did. It's called Snowden.
Right.
And so I watched those and I was like, I'm out. It's kind of just like how with religion. With me there was one point, the final tipping point was like, I'm done. That's it. For me it was watching those movies and realizing just how far reaching the government surveillance is, and that it's explicitly for the purpose of spying on us. And I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, because I use this analogy with my students sometimes. I say government is like a dog, right? And you want to have a certain kind of dog, usually. Now, you can have a corgi, and I love corgis, by the way.
Oh, the short little things.
Yeah, with
The short,
little
fat
fox
ones.
ears. Yeah, man, they look like little loaves of bread.
They do. They waddle around.
They do. They're basically internet candy.
Yes.
I love corgis, but corgis are fairly useless. Like when you get right down to it, right? So if you have a government that's like a corgi, it's adorable and you like to take pictures of it. But if a foreign invader comes, it's basically hosed, right? But at the same time, you don't want a bear to be your dog. Because
or you don't want a full-blown wolf.
Yeah, a full-blown wolf, something like that, where you're just like, listen, it'll beat your enemies, but also it'll kill you someday.
It'll probably kill you too, yes.
It's not it's not very good. You want like a German Shepherd, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You want something that'll protect the house, or at least buy you enough barking time so you can protect yourself, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what the main purpose of a dog is, at least in terms of home protection, is essentially just to buy you enough time so you can get your gun.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much what the government should probably do, right? It needs to provide you with the means of protecting yourself, and it needs to protect you from foreign invaders.
Yeah.
To the best of its ability. But again, if you give it too much, then you can't stop it, and you're no longer the master. And if you're not the master of your dog, then you're just chow.
Yeah.
So we're about at time. But to kind of wrap up, why be a libertarian today, or at least the type of libertarian that we are?
Why?
What would be your response to why stay this way? I mean, we can't win, right? I mean, or at least we haven't yet. We haven't come close to winning. What is it about libertarianism that's worth sticking around for?
For me, it's the personal freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that, people, as long as you're not hurting other people, as long as you're not infringing upon their rights, you can do what you want. You're free to do what you want. And for me, coming from a very controlling religious background, to me, that's extremely important.
Yeah, I think I would pretty much agree with that, right? Life, liberty, property. That's really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that the other parties do a good job of trying to maintain your rights. They're just trying to win. They're trying to beat each other.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, and I think this is kind of a big theme of this podcast, I think in the effort to defeat one another, they have lost their way. They have strayed away from their original principles. And it's really just become a form of dogma. It's another religion to believe in. Mm-hmm. And it has its heroes, and it has its prophets, and it has its stories, and it has its sins. And I feel that libertarianism ultimately is the skeptic's guide to politics.
That's a good way of putting it.
So I think libertarianism and atheism go hand in hand. Most atheists would probably disagree with me because they tend to veer left.
Yeah.
But to me, I think everyone just needs to listen to Penn Jillette more. That's really where I'm at. All right. Well, please direct all your hate mail to where should they direct their hate mail?
Oh gosh. There's a YouTube channel that I've called Governing Ourselves, where I'm going to be posting the episodes. And there's also a Twitter account called Governing Ourselves. It's at Governing Us. And then Facebook as well, also called Governing Ourselves. So yeah, send all your hate mail that way.
That's right.
Oh.
You guys aren't real libertarians, and we'll get that chat, I'm sure. But that's fine. We're all trying to, find what's right and do what's right. And I think part of what works and doesn't work about libertarianism is that it is so open to debate.
Yeah.
That we have difficulty, defining what it is at times and agreeing with what it should be.
Mm-hmm. It's part of the nice thing too, though. It's open to debate.
Yeah.
It's not closed off to it. You can talk about it.
Yep. So, ANCAPs, classical liberals, big L libertarians, whatever, man. Let's chat it out.
Yeah. Yep. Well, in the next few episodes, we're going to be talking about different religious topics. And something you said to me is that a lot of these religious topics also kind of have some political implications as well. So we'll be getting into those. We'll be getting into those next.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening, folks. Until next time, stay free
and stay skeptical.